We go live at 7:33, no? Okay, Wale is here.
Okay, hi, how are you?
Hi, Wale, good evening. We'll just
Hi.
go live. I'll do some introduction and wait for 2-3 minutes for everybody to just log in. And then I think these guys will let you in. And yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know what happened. It helped me. It started trying to get me to register. So
Oh.
thanks for forwarding the link.
Okay. And you will be sharing the presentation from your laptop?
Can you run the presentation or not? Hold on.
Wait.
Hold on, I can share it. Just hold on before we go live. Let me just pull it up.
I can do it as well.
No. Let me just do it. Let me pull it up. So Akansha.
Ragini, what are the next steps? What are we doing?
We are going to go live as soon as Dr. Wale finds the presentation, I think.
Yeah, no problem. It's loading.
Should we still say that we'll begin in 5 minutes or?
What's this, sorry?
No, this is for Ragini. Ragini?
Yeah.
Should we still say that we'll begin in 5 minutes or?
Yes.
I think
yes.
we should okay. Should I say that or should we just begin?
No. I think I'll say that in the introduction. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm all set.
Okay, so Dr. Wale, I'll keep your video off right now. And when Akanksha introduces you, then I'll start your video, okay?
Okay.
Cool.
Are we good to go?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Nigerian University of Technology and Management Leadership Series. This is the second session that we have organized. We'll be starting in exactly 5 minutes. We just want everybody to give a chance to log in. If you're already here, thank you for being on time. Sorry, we were just running some technical hygiene checks, and that's why we are a couple of minutes late. And also, I mean, if you have people who you feel will benefit from this session, it's still not late to share the link with them. Please share the link with your friends, colleagues, or anyone you feel will benefit from this session. Also, just for you to know, this is an interactive session, so feel free to leave your comments or questions in the chat boxes, whether you are on Zoom or YouTube. And yeah, thank you once again. Okay, we have 64 participants as of now. We'll wait for 4 minutes and start at 3:10. Okay, I think more and more people are joining us. We'll wait for another minute. Okay, I think we can begin. For those of you who have just joined us, good afternoon again and welcome to the Nigerian University of Technology and Management Leadership series. This is the second of the series that we are running for you today. And we'll be running these sessions to connect you with global faculty and industry leaders who will be sharing their personal journeys and unique perspectives on leadership, technology, and management. We have about 355 people registered for this webinar. Many of you will be streaming live from YouTube, and we look forward to engaging with all of you. Through the NUTM Leadership Series, we hope to give you a glimpse of the sort of conversations that will happen in the NUTM classroom, where we aim to develop future leaders of Africa. Very quickly, for the benefit of those who don't know about us, NUTM is a pioneering higher education initiative focused on nurturing leaders for Nigeria and Africa. The university focuses on STEM and management in its academic offerings at the undergraduate, postgraduate, and the doctoral levels. We are right now, the work is going on for the full university, but we are launching this year with the flagship initiative, which is called NUTM Scholars Program. NUTM Scholars Program is a one-year interdisciplinary postgraduate program in technology, entrepreneurship, and design. Through the initiative, we hope to nurture leaders in technology and business for the growing needs of Africa and for the transformative leadership education that the country and the region needs today. So as far as the program is concerned, we are currently on the lookout for 60 exceptional young individuals from Nigeria and other parts of the African world to join the founding class. Our third application has passed, but we have extended the deadline, and the final deadline is July 15th. So, in case you haven't still applied for the program, feel free to apply. We have received an overwhelming response. We are taking our time to process those applications, but it's been a wonderful journey reading your applications, talking to candidates, knowing them more, and delving deeper into the passion they have to create impact within the country and within the region. Okay, that's about the program. I think this is becoming a one-sided conversation, so I'll not take much of your time before I introduce our speaker for today. Today we are speaking with Dr. Winston Wole Shoboyejo. He serves as the provost at the WPI US. And he's also one of the first visiting faculty at NSP. Before this, he was a professor at the Princeton University for about 17 years. He holds a PhD from Cambridge University. Yeah, I think that's about him. I think we'll just introduce you to him now, Dr. Shoboyejo. Yes, here he is. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. Very well. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, and thank you very much for agreeing to do this for us and for our viewers. We all are very curious to know more about you, and the topics definitely sounds very interesting: science, technology, and African development. But yeah, before we move to the topic, how are you? Where are you working from right now? And how has the whole pandemic affected your work?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm actually working from home in a place called Northborough, Massachusetts, which is on the outskirts of Worcester, outskirts of Boston. The pandemic has kept us all at home, which has been good. So I've had a lot of time to spend with my family. But I've also been able to communicate with the world from my computer. So it's been a great experience.
Right. Like, it's the way we are talking about science, technology, and development. This is also, it's just like you and I can talk to each other from different parts of the world, right? And the audience is in a different part of the world. So it's just like we're today in such an over-connected world, right?
No, it's a great way to communicate. And in fact, I can work with my group members in Nigeria and various parts of Africa. I can communicate with you in India and
Yes.
interact with my colleagues, all across the world.
Right, right. So, Professor Shoboyejo, before we delve into the topic, etc., why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey? Your roots in Nigeria, your education and experiences, and what are you doing today?
Sure, thank you. So I was actually raised in Lagos. My father was a professor at the University of Lagos in mechanical engineering. So I grew up in Lagos in the 60s and 70s and left Nigeria when I was a boy at the age of 13 to go to school in England. I went to a high school in England, did my degrees at London and Cambridge University with the hope of one day going back to Nigeria. At the time when I applied from Cambridge, my application was actually not supported. So I ended up coming to America in 1988, first to work in industry for McDonnell Douglas, where I worked for 4 years as a research scientist. And then I went into academia, which was my first love, really. First as a professor at Ohio State University, then at Princeton, where I spent 17 years as a professor. And during this period, I helped to establish the African University of Science and Technology in Abuja, as well as the Nelson Mandela AIST, African Institute of Science and Technology in Arusha. So I've been back and forth. I'm currently serving as provost at WPI, which is person in charge of the academic activities there. And I'm also supervising and teaching students in various places across Africa.
Right, right. That sounds wonderful. Like quite a journey through, hopping from Nigeria to England to the US and then back and forth with Nigeria.
It's been an exciting journey. And sometimes I really feel that I was grounded in Nigeria, and that gave me the foundation for life.
Right, right. Maybe through NUTM we can do that. So yes, tell us more about your involvement with NUTM.
So I first came into contact with Oke Enemela, who is one of the founders of NUTM. And through our conversation, I became very fascinated with this idea of building a world-class university near Lagos, Ogun State. And I could see that with our population of 20 million people, that if we really get this right, this will make a huge difference, not only to Lagos and the surrounding areas, but really to Africa. And although many people might not see it, I believe that Lagos and the regions around Lagos really could represent the commercial center for Africa for the future and could be driven by the kinds of things that a university like this could do. So this happened just a few months ago, and I have to say it's been a pleasure to meet and interact with everybody that's trying to make this vision happen.
Great. I think looks like exciting times ahead, and the team here also has thoroughly enjoyed working with you. And you've been our mentor pretty much all throughout the journey, and we look forward to working with you. As we move forward in this journey. And of course, we would love to host you. As one of our faculty for the scholars. So yes, thank you very much for doing that as well.
No, I look forward to teaching. I look forward to working with the students and actually meeting you in person,
Yes. Okay, I think I'll not take more time here, and over to you for the session. And then people will be sending us questions. So we'll be doing a little bit of a Q&A after the session is over. And yeah, we'll take it from there. So over to you. You can share your screen. And
all right, could you enable me to share my screen, please?
Yes. Ragini, who's our moderator for today. Ragini, could you please do that? Could you enable, Dr. Shoboyejo to share his screen? Okay, yes, you should be able to do it now.
Okay. Here we go. Let's see if we got this right.
Yes.
Hold on. I don't think I have the right one. Let me get the right one. Great. Thank you. Can you see my screen? Yes?
Let me, yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to share a few thoughts on science and technology for African development. I'm going to really start by giving a historical perspective. And so for most of us that have grown up in Nigeria and various parts of Africa, often we think about development as being driven by economics. But it turns out that history has shown us that science and technology really provides the engines of development. And I'm going to start with a few examples of development that originated in North Africa, driven by science and technology and education, and show how that went from North Africa to Europe to North America, and most recently moving towards Asia and the BRIC countries. Now, it turns out that the key variable in all of this is the number of scientists and engineers per million people. Roughly, you need 1,000 scientists and engineers per million people to drive this process if you're going to have a critical mass. You also need to invest roughly 1 to 4% of your gross domestic product in science, technology, and innovation. So the countries that do these two things develop. The countries that don't do these two things do not develop. And that's my premise, and it's driven by data. Now, if you look at history, a lot of what we think about as early civilization actually started in Africa. Most of us are familiar, of course, with the prowess of the Egyptians that led to the pyramids. Some of us might also be familiar with the role of the Ethiopians, the Abyssinians, in the obelisks in ancient Abyssinia. All of these showed mastery of technologies at the time that led to great success. Now, many of you will not know this, but Carthage in Phoenicia was also in Africa. It's in modern day North Africa. And if you look at the early universities, the earliest university in the world was actually started in Fez, Morocco, by a Muslim woman in 859, almost 200 years before Oxford University was created. So we had many centers, and we had early civilization and investment in scholarship. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the old Phoenician Empire, the capital of the old Phoenician Empire, was Carthage, which is in modern day Tunisia. And if you look at the civilization to your left, and you look at the design of Carthage, you find that it mimics the design of modern Rome. And so much of the technology, much of the history that drove what later happened in Rome came from Phoenicia. And this map showing the left side Africa and the right side Rome just gives you an idea of just how much was taken from North Africa. So there is a history of an era when old Carthage had all the technology that it needed well above at a time when the West actually copied from this in ways that are quite clear. Now, if you look at more modern examples, and you look at the example of Singapore, you see this tiny little island on the tip of Malaysia getting its independence in the early 60s, about the same time that most of our African countries got their independence. The difference, though, was that Lee Kuan Yew, who was the first leader of Singapore, had an idea that combined entrepreneurship and science and technology in a way that was very strategic. He recognized that his deep sea harbor was the gateway to the East. And so he built a very deep sea port that made it crucial in the transportation of fuel to China. And this strategic decision made Singapore rich. He then invested that money in silicon technology and hard drive technology as a basis for creating an industrialized Singapore. And through these strategies, Lee Kuan Yew went from a country that looked like this, which was not very developed in the early 60s, to a country that looks like this today, which is one of the leading economic powers, not only in the Far East, but in the world. And driving a lot of this was the National University of Singapore, which was their key university to really achieve excellence, as well as Nanyang University of Technology, which was a key university to train people for industry. By the way, this was achieved in one generation. And today, Singapore is one of the richest countries per capita in the world. If you look at the case of India, here's a case where the vision of one man, Nehru, who was the first leader of India, had this vision that investment in high quality science and technology could really create the basis, long-term basis for India's wealth. And so he supported the establishment of the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore and the Indian Institutes of Technology, which trained the very highest quality scientists and technologists that have transformed India in the last 50 years. What's interesting about this is that Nehru's vision came at a time when India was relatively poor, but they realized that the capacity of Indians through a merit-based process could enable the education of a new generation of Indians that would transform India. And today, 50 years or 60 years from that date, it's really clear that the IIT graduates have not only transformed India, but they've actually transformed the world. Here you're showing the picture of the Indian Institute of Science at the top right, and also the distribution of IITs that now exist all over India. And the graduates of these, including the CEO of Microsoft and many distinguished Indians, have really made a huge impact on the world. So if you look at their impact on Bangalore, which looked like this when this all started, you see that the education and the vitality that the IIS brought to Bangalore has transformed Bangalore into this. And Bangalore is now one of the leading tech cities in the world, mainly because they have a critical mass of high quality scientists, engineers, and technical people in a booming, innovating city that's one of the most vibrant cities in the world. Now, so if you look then at the case of India, Nehru recognized the need to invest in high quality science and technology. He supported the Indian Institutes of Technology and Indian Institute of Science. And more recently, there are new schools such as the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad that are building on the foundation of STEM and blending science and technology with business. There are also schools that are bringing in the liberal arts, training more complete people to really engage the world with an understanding of the world. And Ashoka University is a good example of this. And so what's now happening is that the transformational impact of these schools are driving India into the 21st century. So if you look then at the East, you can see that there are clear lessons of what we can learn, and also from the West. The key is to recognize and invest in high quality science and technology education, but you also have to recognize new and emerging trends when they happen. And so in the case of many of the countries in the East, they recognize the importance of silicon technology for the digital age, for microelectronics. This was the case of Singapore and many other countries in the East. And in the case of India, she also recognized the importance of information technology, in which India, of course, now plays a major role. And if you look at these examples, in my opinion, they really borrowed from some of the strategies that the US took to take the lead in industry from Europe as the leader in science and technology. So the real question then is, what is that opportunity for Africa? What's that silicon opportunity, or what's that pharmaceutical opportunity for us in ways that will enable Africa to also play a major role in using science and technology for development. So it's difficult to predict the long-term future, but I can tell you that many of the factors that would drive the short-term future are already here. And many of those will rely on biotechnology, from biodiversity, from natural products to synthetic biology, and to new pandemic sciences that will create new solutions that will enable the world to overcome the challenges we face today. They also involve the use of nanotechnology, from energy to water purification, in ways that will enable us to develop the kind of solutions to our energy needs, our water purification needs, and many of our needs across society. And then we have the opportunity in the era of the fourth industrial revolution to use information technology to transform human capacity, to develop expertise in artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and the Internet of Things in ways that will create within Africa the human capacity to use these 21st century technologies to solve some of our problems and become part of the global system. So if you look at all of these, they sound grand, but of course we recognize that the needs of Africa are more basic. And so the frontiers alone are not the simple answer. People in Africa need food, shelter, energy, health, transportation, and basic infrastructure. We also need to be able to add value to our natural resources, which means we need to think creatively to find solutions to our problems. We need to engage the young. We need to engage all spectrum of society in research, education, entrepreneurship, and the recognition of these emerging opportunities and how to transform them into real goals. So what we need to do then is to do research, but not as individuals, but as groups. So just to illustrate this, I want to just give you examples of some of the research that's gone on in my own research group, where we basically decided to address these challenges. So we've developed nanotechnology to detect and treat cancer. We've developed new ways of purifying water that can enable you to remove viruses, bacteria, and various chemical pathogens from water. We've developed new solar cells, and we've developed new ways of developing sustainable building materials. Now, what's special about this is that this has been done in collaboration with Africans. And through these methods, we've actually made significant contributions to global science, not as individuals, but as groups. And I want to describe to you the work that's been done by my extended research group and collaborators in ways that have connected to real solutions to our challenges. So if you look at the next thing, I also want to show you that as you think about this, it's important to think about how you transform our natural resources into wealth. So to the top left there, you see an artisanal miner who works very hard to obtain very meager living because the scale of the mining is not appropriate and the technologies used and the business approach is also not one that is scalable. In contrast, if you look at somebody like Dangote, who's Africa's richest man, what he has done is to create industry that has transformed that mineral potential into wealth. And if you look at the map of Africa, what you find is that in every country, we have great resources. And I would argue that every country is waiting for its own Dangote to transform those resources into wealth. And that's part of why I am very excited about the National University of Technology and Management, because it requires you not only to have a knowledge of the science and technology, but also of the business aspects that you need to transform these into wealth. And if you look, by the way, at Africa, not just in terms of mineral resources, but also in terms of energy resources, you find that Africa is rich. We have not only fossil fuels in the Gulf of Guinea and many countries in Africa, we have solar energy that can provide a third of the world, Africa's needs, just in the Sahara Desert. We have hydropower in the single drop of the Congo River that can provide a third of the continent's needs. And we have geothermal energy running from Egypt to Kenya that can also provide a third of the continent's needs, which means that we could then think of all sorts of creative ways that we can use our wind energy and our fossil fuels to generate energy, not only for us, but in strategic ways for those that we share to sell these to. Those are the kinds of things that we should be thinking about, how we build the industry around this as the industry of the future. And then if we look at our natural materials, many of you will look at a material like bamboo and you say, well, it grows everywhere, it's a nuisance. It turns out it's actually a very remarkable material that has excellent strength to weight ratio and stiffness to weight ratio that makes it a potential advanced material for many applications. And in my group, we've developed bamboo racing bikes that are commercialized in America in a way that now sells each bike for between $2,000 and $8,000 a bike, ridden by high-performance bicycle enthusiasts. We've developed bamboo wind turbines and people movers as examples of ways in which you can apply what we think of as a simple natural material in exotic ways. And by understanding the strength and the properties of the bamboo, it turns out that you can understand these sufficiently well to now start thinking of bamboo in more complex structures, or to start embedding it in structures that really enclose all sorts of materials that you can use for radar and for all sorts of applications in sensing in the real Wakanda. And then in China, they've actually started building skyscrapers from bamboo. And they have one, this is the Krosky building in Shanghai, which is currently the tallest bamboo structure in the world, driven by that understanding of the mechanical properties of bamboo. And to your right is the next building that they want to build, which is another tall structure in Shanghai, which will then become the tallest bamboo structure in the world. So the question that I ask you and your generation is, why not Africa? Why not begin to envisage this and build the technical skills in a way that will enable us to achieve such great feats with the materials that we have in abundance in our own environment? Now, in the case of cancer, many of you may not know this, but cancer is currently the second biggest killer of people in Africa. And it is also the second biggest killer of people in the world. By the year 2030, cancer will become the biggest killer of people in the world. And most forms of cancer have genetic markers that express themselves on the surfaces that you can target. And so we've been looking at ways in which we can target the cancers that exist in Africans. And so when African women get breast cancer, they have certain receptors that they express that we can target with nanotechnology. That nanotechnology then enables you to image the cancer early or to treat it in a way that allows you to shrink or possibly eliminate the tumor. So by doing studies on women in Africa and at the National Hospital in Abuja, we've been able to identify those receptors and target them very specifically with nanoparticles that enable us to image the tumors, as well as drugs that enable us to target those tumors very specifically. So if you look at the image to your left, these are MRI images taken from our animal experiments. To the bottom left is a breast tumor, 1 centimeter wide. And you notice that it doesn't have much contrast. When we inject magnetic nanoparticles into that region, the image to your top left shows the enrichment in contrast. With images like this, we show that you can get less than 1 millimeter resolution in imaging, which allows you then the opportunity to detect the cancer early. So with methods like this, we're now working to build this out with AI techniques for the interpretation to really develop strategies for translating this into practice. If you look at the other thing that we've done is to take cancer drugs and conjugate them with molecular recognition units that specifically attach to breast cancers that are found in African women. And if you look at the curve in the yellow, in the absence of the drug, the tumor will grow. If you look at the blue curves or the green curve, you will see that in the presence of the targeted drug, you shrink the tumor to 0, which basically means you can eliminate the tumor by designing a targeted drug. And so this again is work done by African scientists and technologies working in collaboration with folks in my group. And what we are now doing is working with private investors as well as doctors to do clinical trials with the hope of showing that this is an example of work that African scientists and engineers and business people can do to bring something not only to an African market, but also to a global market. And we can do similar things with imaging of cervical cancer. And essentially what we're doing there is we're working with taking digital telephone images of cervical lesions. And by doing image treatment of those using 500 clinical studies that were done by one of my students from India, what we are able to show is we can digitize this in a way that can be connected through telemedicine to diagnostics. Again, simple ideas driven by research, creating innovation that can transform lives. The problem of cervical cancer, by the way, is a major problem in African environments where African women suffer from poor diagnosis. Many of the hospitals try to have expensive colposcopy systems that they can't afford. But what we're trying to do is to develop a cell phone-based method that everybody can afford. And as you do this, you have to think about networks. So we've been working with the Nelson Mandela institutions to really develop a network of universities trying to do research across Africa, addressing African needs in different ways, and essentially building out that platform to a place where we've done research that is in Africa, that is in Abuja. Now, we've also been looking forward to this new era of the fourth industrial revolution as an opportunity for Africa to transform itself. So many people would argue that the first industrial revolution happened in Europe and North America. I would argue that as this fourth industrial revolution is happening today, young people all across Africa need to engage the fields of the fourth industrial revolution. The information technology, the nanotechnology that's driving communications and many other areas, and become masters of this. But not only masters of the science and the technology, but also masters of the business to translate these into local opportunities and global opportunities. So within that context, learning about fields such as robotics and its applications to production, very critical. Learning about fields such as robotics and their applications to medicine and welfare of human beings in home and hospital contexts, very exciting. Being part of the new generation, not only to develop electric cars, but autonomous vehicles, is a great opportunity, not only for the West, but for all parts of Africa where these vehicles are going to become common and very critical to the success of societies all across the world. So I call all of these technologies smart world technologies that are going to change the world. The great thing about it is those of you that are interested in tech have an opportunity to acquire the skills that can drive these new technologies and these new industries. And so I see a vision for NUTM as a world-class center that will prepare the next generation of leaders in science, technology, and innovation in Africa. And Lagos, I think, is a vibrant, creative place that could become, in my opinion, the center for African development with a critical mass of 20 million dynamic Africans driven by their understanding of science and their creative approach to the world to apply the kind of skills that they will gain from a place like NUTM to problems and opportunities in an African scheme. So just like Bangalore went in one generation to this great developed hub, I see the transformation that NUTM can provide to the Lagos area as one that's depicted by these images, where if we really build the capability at the quality level that we want, we will really transform Lagos into a center that looks like this. So in summary, what I've tried to do is just highlight a few examples that show the key role that science and technology can play in African development. I hope you can see from the examples of Asia that we too in Africa have the opportunity to leverage our education and STEM to drive the kind of innovation that can address our local and global challenges whilst creating wealth and future that's brighter for all of us. And I hope you can see that there are ways in which we can do science that has an impact on health, that has an impact in various areas that address our needs. And that has to be our focus. And just as the Silicon Valley provided the wealth for California to grow. I argue that Africa's silicon is the minerals and the people of Africa. But we have to find ways of adding value to this. It is not enough to just ask other people to come and develop these things. We need to build our knowledge base. We need to manage every aspect of this, including the creation of wealth that comes in ways that drive the creation of a middle class and also a working class that all benefit from these resources. And as we look at this new opportunity of the smart world, let's think about ways in which we can use our education, our research, our interdisciplinary collaborations to add value to people and resources. And inspired by the Asian tigers before us, let's really think clearly about how we can create a new generation of African lions with the National University of Technology and Management as one of the major engines of development. Thank you very much. So at this point, I would be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shoboyejo. Thank you so much. This was really insightful. At least I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure some of the comments and the questions I'm receiving from the audience echoes the same. So I am just, in the interest of time, going to take a couple of questions. And yes, so the first question we have is from Samuel. He's asking, what are the technicalities that could be employed in practicalizing growth in technological advancements, especially as it applies to business? Quite a complicated question, I must say.
I think, first of all, we need to develop a culture in which business recognizes innovation and how to invest in innovation. So currently, I think we have more of a trading mentality in how we invest, where we look for immediate return within a short time frame. So when you want innovation to happen, you need to have various approaches to investment in the different stages of innovation, where you have more of a medium-term return to this. You also need to have an innovation culture where people realize that there's a risk level that you take as you invest in this. So we need to basically build a venture capitalist structure that has innovation as part of it. We also, by the way, have to have experts in those areas who know how to manage those investments and how to scale the businesses. This is something that I would say we're still just beginning to do in Africa. I would argue that countries like Kenya maybe are a little bit further ahead, but we need to build that investment structure that then translates innovation into wealth. This, in my mind, is key. Now, within the group of folks doing science and technology, we also need to build an understanding of how this is done and a recognition of how each one of us can play different roles. So for example, somebody like myself, I'm an academic, but what happens is when I create new ideas, there are people that can translate those into patents, and there are ways in which my patents have been licensed by companies such as Samsung, so that I don't necessarily have to be the one that creates the business, but my innovations can be licensed by those that create the business in ways that create wealth. And so we need to establish these kinds of cultural elements to really show that we can translate science and technology into business and have the different players working together within that ecosystem to make that happen. So if you're wondering why it hasn't happened in Africa, it's because we haven't put all these pieces in place for science and technology to drive innovation and economic development.
Okay, I think, Samuel, I hope that answers your question. I'll move to the next question. Sir, what do you think about Nigeria's maritime industry, and do you believe that an investment in STEM would be enough to revive the country without diversifying our economy and dealing with our current challenges? For instance, piracy in the Gulf of Guinea.
You know, I think that, of course, the maritime industry requires significant investment. It's really unfortunate when you look at our ports. Our ports are basically built to receive goods in, but not to ship goods out. And we need a very, very robust maritime industry that really will enable us to become a major exporter to the world with the right infrastructure to support the export of our product. Right now, the whole setup we have is configured to bring in things in, but not taking things out. Beyond that, I don't think it's enough to only invest in science and technology. You have to invest in science and technology, but the opportunity also to sell things locally and abroad. If you don't have that integrated strategy, you can have science and technology without development. So there has to be an understanding of the demand that's motivating your science and technology in a way that allows you to connect the capacity that you have to the opportunities that exist. Now, initially, when you start doing that investment, you just need to build scientific and technological capacity. The reason is that without that, you don't have the critical mass that's required to attract industry and that's required to really solve problems. But as you do that, you do need to build the business component, blended in ways that will connect that science and technology capacity to markets that generate wealth, which is really why I think this concept of the National University of Technology and Management is trying to do. It basically says the technology is important, but the tech connection to markets creates wealth. And that ecosystem is the one that we're trying to drive from Africa.
Thank you. Thank you, Wale. Thank you so much for this. I have a couple of more questions pouring in. So the next question we have is, in some of the cases of development you cited, the leader of the country played the critical role to envision and facilitate the development. What is the probability of success when the visioning stems from universities such as Nigerian University of Technology and Management?
You know, one of the things that I find very encouraging today is that I can tell you of a few African leaders that have driven investments in STEM. Today, no question about it, the most notable leader that's driving his economy with STEM is Paul Kagame. So if you look at Rwanda today, the development that Rwanda is enjoying is really driven by Paul Kagame, who sees the importance of investing in science and technology. I must also acknowledge the role that President Obasanjo played when he was president of Nigeria in investing in science and technology and really making the African University of Science and Technology happen. The same is true in Tanzania. There they're spending really closer to 2% of GDP. And there again, their former president played a major role in establishing investments in science and technology. But we need to now blend these investments as we begin to build the critical mass with investments in innovation and the connection to markets, and also strategic efforts to attract certain kinds of industries into our own environment. So leadership is important, but also creativity is most important. And this is where I see a great opportunity for Africa. I think we have a lot of creative people. And if we look at a country like Italy, one of the things that I always like to say is Italy has some of the most creative people, but not necessarily the government that facilitates the kinds of innovations that you might imagine coming out of Italy. And so looking at how we can create opportunities for creativity to flourish through an investment climate, and also making sure that we build in the minds of every young African the idea that your dreams can happen in an environment that invests in those dreams. So I think leadership, of course, is helpful, but I also think we need to look for private enterprise-driven methods to create an environment where African young and old and middle-aged can have great ideas in ways that can translate into success in local and global markets. So it's not just government, it's not just leadership, it is also driven by the creativity and education of people, especially when you have a critical mass of them.
Right, right. I think very well said. Okay, the next question we have is energy is perceived as a major driving force for development. I feel Africa is far behind the energy requirement for development, and most of the research we are doing to address this challenge is focused on solar energy. Do you really think this is sufficient to address this need?
I don't think solar energy alone can address our energy needs in Africa. So I think solar energy can play a niche, especially for basic lighting and low power density applications. And so what I do think we need is more of a holistic approach to energy, where we look at fossil fuels, we look at natural gas especially, but we also look at wind, we look at hydro, and we look at geothermal. And as we look at this, we should see a framework in which we think about rural and urban contexts as well as industrial contexts. And we should really see energy as an industry that really requires world-class expertise to run. So it turns out that I don't think we have the world-class expertise we need to run the energy industry in Africa today. And it's not just a privatization issue. And the reason is that we don't recognize all the different elements of technical expertise that we have to bring in to make this work. We have to train that expertise. And then we also need to do research into the peculiar needs in Africa in a way that could drive the establishment of that industry. When you do this, I believe that we can solve the energy crisis we have by bringing in the right expertise to operate the system and to admit that we don't have the expertise at the moment to have an electrical power grid that is robust. As we do that, we will then have the energy basis for development. And as I showed you before, if I look at just the energy in the Sahara Desert, the energy in the single drop of the Congo River, and the geothermal resources of Africa, we have all the energy we need to power our needs. The problem is we don't have the distribution, we don't have the storage, and we don't have the logistical capacity to manage those processes. So we have to train that next generation of people that can do so. And we have to do so in a way that establishes energy as an industry for Africa. And so it's not just a case of having the resource and waiting for Europe to take the energy from the Sahara Desert to power Europe. It's having an African vision, the scientific and technical expertise, and the business savvy to control the outcome. That is what we need to achieve for energy issues to be addressed in an African context.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Shoboyejo. I think I will just take one last question. And I have the question with me here. Considering that our African universities major on theory without the requisite tools for implementation, how could the private sector help the cause of technological practice as an aid to the insufficiency of the government efforts?
This is a really good question. So one of the questions that people often ask me is, why did I leave Princeton University to go to WPI? And the answer is simple. WPI is a place that focuses on theory and practice. So quite frankly, one of the things we need to change in our educational system is this approach of theory and theory. Theory and theory maybe helps produce more theory, but it doesn't solve problems. And many of the challenges we have in Africa require you to have an approach of theory and practice. But I would argue that you also need one more. It's really theory and practice to meet needs that are truly demand driven. And quite frankly, I really think that as African universities think about how they can reposition themselves for the future, they need to bring on board this idea of theory and practice to solve problems or meet global demand. And quite honestly, this is what NUTM brings together. It's this idea of science and technology blended with management to meet global demands. And that, in my opinion, is the unique opportunity for Africa. And I would argue for young people that are considering applying to NUTM, this is what is going to make you different. This is what's going to position you for future leadership.
Okay, yeah, I think I very much like the question as well, and kind of addresses the need for NUTM and many institutions like that, and why all of us have come together to do this. Okay, maybe we can take one last question. Sorry, I'm just very sad to not answer people's questions. So maybe one last question.
That's fine.
Okay, so Vasiu, sorry.
That's fine.
Thank you, Professor Shoboyejo. So this question is from Vasiu. The person asks, we have technology incubation centers. We had technology incubation centers previously that did not work out as anticipated. What do you recommend we make provision for? And how do you prevent another TIC disaster?
I think that having isolated incubation centers without the investment capabilities to transform the innovations, or without an ecosystem in which they operate, is like having an individual in a desert with no water. You have to create all the things that sustain these, and you also need to nurture the sources of innovation so you're rich with innovative ideas. So we live, in the case of Nigeria, in a country that has limited investment in research and innovation and a limited ecosystem. And so as we think about establishing what is now the NUTM, we need to think about an ecosystem in which, as we train people, there will be technology parks and research parks that are connected not only within Nigeria, but to global demand. And we also need to make sure that we nurture these in a way that was different from what we had before. It is not enough to just build an innovation park. You have to connect this to the ecosystem. You have to bring investors in. You have to train people in how they make pitches. There's so much that we have to do, which we didn't do before, that will enable us, I think, to make this really a very different outcome.
Right. I think completely agree with you, and we are taking notes as you stated some of these things, so that we make sure that this is different from some of the past initiatives and much more impactful than anything that Nigeria has seen. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Akansha, can I just say one thing, just to give an illustration of this? So if you could imagine, I don't know, 60, 70 years ago, around Stanford University, there wasn't much. But the Dean of Engineering at the time invested in some young people who had some ideas. And it turns out those were Hewlett and Packard, right? And so they started a small company. And gradually, there was nurturing of that company, which became one of the biggest companies. And other small companies started around them and started an ecosystem. Around those people were a bunch of investors who started investing in tech and realizing that this was profitable. And they nurtured this culture, and gradually this grew into Silicon Valley. So let's use that as a motivation for how we can think of NUTM. NUTM can become a hub around which small companies start doing things in tech. They may supply maybe the telecoms industry, they may supply the biotech industry, they may supply various transportation industries or whatever it is that they work on. And they do so by addressing true demands that are real in our own societies. And so this is not abstract. It's really how do you create that ecosystem that you can nurture and grow over time, just as Silicon Valley grew from very small interactions and a vision. Most critical thing is you have to have that knowledge of the science and technology in an environment where these kinds of multiple interactions allow you to connect to markets and success. And I believe very much that we can do this in Africa with the right mindset. And I'm fully convinced, having been a child in Africa, growing up in that environment, that we have all the intelligent people that we need if we create the right learning and innovation environment for this to happen. Okay.
Right, right. I think, yeah, this is such a beautiful example. You know, this analogy of Stanford and Silicon Valley is very similar to at least what we aspire for. And even if we can, take that step in the right direction to create a similar ecosystem with NUTM, I think half the battle is won. And Nigeria is full of young people, and Africa is full of young people who have passion, and who are brimming with these ideas, who can actually transform the area and the university into an ecosystem like that. And who knows, maybe 50 years from now, we'll be talking about NUTM and that kind of a Silicon Valley in Nigeria. So yes, I think very, very interesting, and definitely aspiring. Okay, unfortunately, this is all the time we have today. And Dr. Shoboyejo, thank you very much for being with us. I think it has been a great session. I had a lot of fun and enjoyed it thoroughly. I hope everyone on the call did as well. And we would love to get your feedback. Please fill out the feedback survey that will be sent to you in a few minutes. So yes, that's all from the session. That's all from Professor Shoboyejo. Yes, he's teaching two courses on the founding class of NSP. So he will be interacting with the scholars on an ongoing basis. So yes, and you're most welcome to reach out to us in case you have any special ideas. We're happy to convey it to him, and we'll be looking forward to hosting more sessions like this so that you can take this conversation forward. We have recorded the session and we'll post it on our website at www.nutmng.org and also on our YouTube channel. Just a quick reminder that we have created the final application deadline, which is on July 15th. We've received an overwhelming response, but the more the better. So yeah, happy to read as many applications as we receive and speak more with you. We have several other webinars planned in the coming weeks. So stay plugged in by following us across our social media handles: Instagram @NUTMNG, LinkedIn and Facebook, the Nigerian University of Technology and Management. You can also visit our website, www.nutmng.org, and you can reach us via email at nutmpmo@nutmng.org. I think that's all from me. That's all from the team. Thank you very much, team, for organizing this. Thank you very much, viewers, for joining us today for such an overwhelming response. We still have about 97 participants on the call. So yes, great participation. Sorry we couldn't take all your questions, but yes, we hope to keep engaging with you throughout our journey as we continue to host more sessions. Thank you once again, everyone, for spending time with us, and we hope you enjoy your rest of the day. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, Akansha. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
You too.